Welcome! The Moonshot Challenge for Education Reform is how to get teachers and children motivated and engaged in deeper learning. How can we flip the statistic from 70% of students and teachers disengaged to 70% engaged instead? The rocket fuel for getting this moonshot off the ground is support for primary human needs, which will make schooling more enjoyable. Simply put, more joy, more genius. But how do we get from here to there? How do we change the system from need thwarting to need supporting? How about a race? Let's put the pedal to the metal and make a run for the finish line. But first, some very unsexy things need to happen before the cars are ready for an exciting finish. How do we turn unsexy supply chain processes into an awesome moment at the finish line? By managing the car, of course. Let's take a look at how a driver manages a car. These are the instrument panels for a 1984 Chevy Corvette and a 2009 Honda Fit. Notice the relative sizes. The movement of the vehicle over land in miles per hour and the rotation of the engine in revolutions per minute are apparently the most important information to have while driving. However, no fuel, no race. Fuel's crucial despite the diminutive display. Imagine how difficult it would be to manage your car if it did not have a fuel gauge. Not impossible, of course, but much more difficult, and lots more people would make mistakes and run out of gas. How can we apply this idea to schooling? How does a person become educated? To draw the parallel with racing cars, how do mainstream schools gauge teacher and student learning? What are the equivalents of moving over land, engine revolutions, and the amount of fuel in the tank? Mainstream schools assume that test scores and grades will tell us everything we need to know about how well Johnny is learning and Jane is teaching. But there is nothing to indicate their levels of fuel as they make that learning journey. In our race to educate citizens, we use test scores and grades to manage the system, which creates a data mask that can sometimes hide their humanity, which encourage behaviors that thwart the primary psychological needs of both teachers and students. For we need to remember that the system is currently producing mostly shallow and fake learning and an absurd amount of violence. Test scores and grades do not provide enough information to manage this complex human system. But they might give us valuable insights into learning if the unsexy basics of being human can be supported first. What do we need to know in order to gauge the fuel for learning and teaching? We need to know the psychological conditions of schools, in particular the patterns of motivation and engagement there. Test scores and grades might still figure most prominently, like speedometers and tachometers, but it is a particularly bad idea to continue neglecting the fuel for deeper learning. Motivation and engagement are important because they are indirect indicators that the primary human needs of the students and teachers are being met. Good patterns of motivation and engagement are only possible when primary human needs are adequately satisfied. As long as we have to use a bureaucracy to manage the school system, then our instruments will necessarily create data masks. But if we can ensure that primary human needs are consistently supported, then more of their humanity will shine through those masks. And to bring this back around, the words motivation and engagement are just technical terms for the components that make up the joy when we proclaim more joy, more genius. So now we can state the situation very simply. Most schools today produce shallow and fake learning because they tend to thwart or neglect the primary human needs of teachers and students. On the other hand, there are schools committed to deeper learning that implement innovations that better support primary human psychological needs. There are schools leading the way, but the most promising models are not being given the right kinds of support to spread their psychological innovations. There is good stuff being done in the name of deeper learning, but the most well-recognized of those models may still value academics more than primary psychological needs supports if they are beholden to either the social justice or accountability ideologies that mislead many mainstream schools. There are schools that appear to make psychological needs support more important than academics by making academic coursework optional. Those kinds of schools are very few and far between, and only a small proportion of those get public funding. They tend to espouse an ideology of freedom and democracy that might be misleading them. I will talk about the ideologies of schooling in my next video, Milking K-12's Sacred Cows. I propose that we go back to Basics 2.0 in order to make sure the psychology of learning stops undermining the academic goals of both teachers and students. By focusing on the principles of primary psychological needs support, we can effectively transform existing schools as well as promote the schools that have already shown the way. Mainstream schools do need to get back to basics. That is, back to being human in school, not just being academic. Academic tools, like reading, writing, and arithmetic, can express the goodness of our humanity. But academic tools can also become instruments of educational malpractice when primary human needs are thwarted instead of supported. The more we can help children and their teachers express joy in school, the more we will see their God-given genius there too. For more about how to bring this about, visit dladvocates.org and look for my book, More Joy, More Genius. Thanks for watching.